I think that people like me, we have a job here to do. We have to tell the stories of these wineries. We have to make the statement along with the wineries. About us, about Armenian wineries, we have to put the word out there and we need to tell everyone about this wine region.
Sit back and grab a glass. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today, beautiful Southern California, on World Series Day, actually. Looking forward to that this evening after yesterday's walk-off Grand Slam, which is incredible. Hey, have a listen to a couple of shows. One of them was Rachel Martin. She was just in here from Oceana Wines, and she has experienced an amazing renaissance in her brand through a non-alcoholic and low-alcoholic brands. And she explains why. And it's the first time in my career after 35 years, because non-alcoholic wines are not new. They've been around for a long time. But I've never tasted the same wine from the same plot, from the same vineyard, made both regular style and then non-alcoholic. So I was able to taste those side by side, a really interesting concept. And another show you should listen to is Randy Dufour. He represents Inniskillin, which is Canadian dessert wine grown near Niagara Falls. And I've never tasted pairings with food like these wines did. Now, I'll admit, after 10 courses or 8 courses we had, there was a lot of dessert wine, but the pairing with Thai food and the spice component was incredible. And the wine Inniskillin, particularly their Cabernet Franc late harvest, is really quite incredible. We're here today, though, to have a conversation with Ani, and I'm going to screw this up because I just wrote it down, Duzdabanyan.
Duzdabanyan.
And she is a journalist turned wine journalist. And we met the other night at a wine tasting that was exclusively Armenian wines. And she introduced herself, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. I wanted to get her on the show. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I know we had a little trouble scheduling and all that, but glad we're here on a Saturday afternoon and a chance to catch up on wine and all things Armenian. And we were just talking a little bit offhand. I thought, let's just talk about Guinea Fest. I thought it was really good.
Yes.
They've expanded into like artifacts, clothes, Nazuk. There's a whole booth on Nazuk.
Yes, you can't go wrong with Nazuk.
I know, and I thought that was pretty fun. But I did taste all the wines. I went through the whole thing. And I was very impressed. Now, the last time I went was 2 years ago, I think, when it was in Burbank.
A year ago, last year.
When it was at the Castaways?
Oh, in Castaway, it was before COVID.
Oh, that was before?
It was the second Guinea Fest.
Has that been as long? That's how long it's been since I've been?
Yes.
And I think there was a substantial increase in I'm not going to say the quality, because the quality has always been fairly solid, but I mean just the stability of the wines.
True, I agree. This is my sixth Guinea Fest. I missed the first one, but since the second one, I was constantly going and covering Guinea Fest for various publications.
Really, yeah.
So,
did you write about it yet?
I did. Last year, I wrote about Guinea Fest for the LA Times, and before that for the Armenian Mirror Spectator. And also, if I'm not mistaken, one time I wrote for an Armenian newspaper in Armenia.
What did you say about this last one? Have you written that article?
This last one, actually, this one was the only one that I wasn't working for.
Oh, you weren't working.
I was
just playing.
Yes, I was just enjoying all the wines, meeting with new producers and just old friends. It was great. And actually, Guinea Fest was the event. And Anush was the person who got me into wine writing.
Anush was.
Yes.
Okay, let's go back to that a little bit. You're born in Yerevan. You're born in Armenia.
Yes, correct.
And you came here about
18 years ago.
18 years ago.
18 years ago.
And you were writing then when you did that?
When I moved to before moving to the United States, I was a journalist. I was working in the news programs in Armenia, even when I was a student at the university.
And what outlets were available to you in Armenia being, 17 years?
So I started when I was 17.
Wow.
My first job was in a French Armenian magazine that is no longer available, unfortunately. But I applied. They wanted a translator, so I applied. But then when they learned that I am a student, they were like, can't you write? You're a journalist. I was like, but I'm just starting. they said, okay, if you can write, let's do it. And I
Yeah.
started to write about different things for this magazine. And 1 year later, they threw a big party and closed down the magazine.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there for a second because I'm a Francophile. My dad spoke French. I
Nice.
speak French. And I find it really interesting because so many Arab countries is common language. In Cairo, where my dad was born, it was the third language. You had to know French prior to the English protectorate. But I don't see a lot of that in Armenia. They had a French Armenian magazine?
Yes. Actually, Armenians are pretty francophone,
Are they?
I would say. The school that I was going, like elementary school and the
Yeah.
high school, so it was francophone kind of a
I didn't.
school.
I
And
never sensed that.
they had two officially francophone schools in Armenia.
Wow. Are
And
they still there?
yes, they're still there. Last time I checked. I don't know. I mean,
I'm going to have to push a little harder to speak French in Armenia.
yes.
It's kind of fun, you know. Anyway, so you were writing for them, and then because now that I don't even know what the local papers are. We were there last month. I don't know why I wouldn't be able to read them anyway, but you were writing for the general journalism.
Yes, just doing interviews, writing about profiles of famous people, etc. But I was just a student.
Yeah.
And then we had a class in investigative journalism, and I loved it. I got involved, and we did a couple of projects in investigative journalism. And later on, I moved into TV journalism, which I wanted to do initially. So I got into news programs, and that was that. And later on, I moved here to the United States with my husband, had my kids.
That tends to slow things down.
Yes,
that tends
obviously
to
it did. But during that time, I still continued to write for the Armenian newspapers back there in Armenia.
Yeah.
And then with Tigran Paskevician, he's a journalist in Armenia, actually veteran journalist. And with him, we did a project, interviewing old people, Armenian people who repatriated to Armenia in the 1930s and 1940s. From the United States, from other European countries. And when Soviet collapsed, or even before that, when they had a chance, they moved back to either Europe or to the United States. So with all my other colleagues who were involved in this project, we interviewed all these people. And at the end, the project became a documentary,
Yeah,
three
I gotta see that.
documentary
I've
movies.
never heard that one.
They did a presentation here years ago in
So this is,
April bookstore.
Indigenous Armenians who had left, then repatriated to the homeland,
Yes.
and then left again.
Yes, because of the genocide. So
Yes.
because of the genocide, they
Right.
moved to other countries. They lived
Then they
there.
came back.
They came back to the Soviet Union, to the Soviet Armenia, and they saw all the horrible conditions that Soviet Armenia was in, and people, and but they couldn't live. Obviously,
Yeah,
a lot of them were exiled into Siberia, and those stories are just horrible
they're
to
terrible.
learn. And when I was doing these interviews, I was actually 8 months pregnant with my daughter, and the emotional thing was very big. But I loved it. So that was the biggest project that I did during the whole time that I was raising my kids. After that, when they were off to school and kindergarten and preschool,
They're all grown up by then, right? No,
no, they're not. Still in the process.
right.
So I started to write about Armenian community for the Armenian Mirror Spectator. This is the oldest English Armenian newspaper in the United States. They're based in Watertown, Massachusetts. So I wrote a lot of stories of the Armenians here, individuals, businesses, organizations in California. And later I just realized that we know everything about ourselves as a community, but others don't. Because as a community, we were very inclusive. We didn't like the others to interfere, to learn kind of our
That's a really
way
good
of
way to
life.
put it.
So, and I
It's
understand
still
it.
that way.
It is still that way, and I understand that it's a way to survive. At least it was a way to survive for our
Well, you had
ancestors.
to, right?
Yes,
You
for
keep
the
your cards close to your chest.
exactly. But I think it's time to invite everybody in.
Yeah.
Because that's gonna be the other way to survive for the next generations. So
Well, I mean, I think that's most obvious when you introduce yourself to a non-Armenian in America, and they all say, "Oh, I know another Armenian." They all know, but that's the end of the road. That's the end of the conversation. Do you know so and so? And it's like,
yeah.
well, they think we know everybody.
And most of the times, it's not a person that you want to be associated.
Yeah, right.
So
it's some Medi-Cal fraudster or something, right?
Or some famous people who are not really representing our culture. So I wanted to change that as much as I could. And I wanted to break down the stereotypes for my community.
Yes.
My first work was for Eater LA. So
really,
that was during
it's a pretty big thing.
It was. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the email back from the editor.
Did they approach you?
No, I approached them. So there was during the COVID. The COVID was kind of ending, and no, I'm sorry. It was during the war. There was this Armenian farmers market. It was COVID. It was war. Everything was together. But in 2020s. And so
where's that Armenian farmers market?
It was in Glendale, next to the Central Library.
I should guess that.
So I learned about that event. And I thought to myself, I don't want to write about this for the Armenian newspaper because we know we are all going to be there. And I pitched the story to Eater. And immediately I got a response that, yes, let's do this.
Wow.
I was very excited.
That's great.
So it turned out that they knew about Armenian cuisine, so especially the food. For example, Zhingalov hats that was going to be there at the market and other stuff too. And that's how I started to write for Eater. And then I moved to other publications. Then I got into wine. So this is a different story because my other big publication that I pitched and started to write for was the Wine Enthusiast.
Yeah. Wow.
So, and that was the article about orange wine made in Armenia. Not in Georgia, in Armenia.
No, in Armenia. That's had one the other night.
Yeah. Yes. So
you didn't know anything about wine, really, or you just knew what you liked? Does your husband drink wine?
He does. And luckily he shares the passion with me.
Yeah.
We do yearly visits to the wine country, any wine country. So we love going to Paso a lot.
That's great. Yeah.
So we go there, we stay there, we taste the wines, we meet people. So, and
Did you meet the Bezjans the other night at the Guinea Fest? They had their Paso Robles winemakers. They were in just last week.
Which one?
Bezjan.
No.
It's called Kinney.
Oh, yes.
It was next to...
yes. I met them before.
Yeah.
Yes,
really sweet.
Yes, very nice people. And
so, it's kind of interesting because journalism, we were talking about this before we started about, writer's block and I've, even though I was a businessman for 35 years and, I bought and sold 17 million bottles of wine, the creative, I'm a creative person in my mind. I'm not my wife's a numbers person, CPA, but I'm the guy that's spatial and I don't really pay attention to the details. And, I just respect that so much and I'm jealous of it, but I respect it and I'm in it now. I get to do this and that and do some writing. But it sounds like based on your career here, if you know how to write, if you know how to communicate with people, even subjects that you might not be intimately familiar with it. You certainly, you're not going to know as much as Anush knows all the studies she's done.
Of course.
But you can still write and communicate thoughts, and regardless of the overall knowledge base of the subject, you study it, you research it, and you write enough to communicate with people.
Of course.
It works. I mean, so here you are, journalists of French, Armenian paper. You come to America, and all of a sudden you're writing for Eater, which is a huge, foodie site, and that moves into the Wine Enthusiast, which is one of the great periodicals of our time in wine.
Yes, true.
Do you like it?
Oh, I love it. I love writing.
Yeah, and about wine, is the wine subject interesting?
Yes, actually, I realized that I was always thinking, what's going to be my like my subject,
Yeah.
something that I really love to do, to write about. And turns out it's wine. At least for now. I don't know.
Yeah, no. But it's really competitive, isn't it?
It is competitive, but when it comes to the Armenian wine, it's not
Yes,
really,
not as
because
much.
there are not many people who write about Armenian wine, which is unfortunate, because all of this revolution that is happening in the Armenia in the Armenian wine industry.
That's an interesting thought, because we do get, and maybe this goes back to what you were saying earlier about we don't tend to want to break out of our mold or out of our communities. And there's a lot of support within the community, and so we get these accolade articles once in a while, and they're usually one-off articles.
Mm-hmm.
They're not written about as much as Napa or as
Yes.
Bordeaux or Burgundy, those places. It's just, oh, by the way, there's Armenia.
Yes,
You want to change that?
I'm planning to.
That's you.
That's my plan. And actually, I see all the articles that I see about Armenian wine that others are writing. They're mostly about the same producers. So
Yeah.
in my career, in my profession, I always tend to write about people who are not popular, but they're doing a great job.
Yeah. Good.
So that's what I'm trying to do for the last, I don't know how many years. And
I mean,
don't
this
know.
industry, building a brand is the hardest thing in the world in any industry. My niece is trying to build a brand in the salad dressing industry, which is, competing with Wishbone and Paul Newman and all that stuff. And wine's even tougher, because there's a lot of huge companies that make wines, and you're never going to get shelf space, on your own. So without your type of skills and communication level with people, it's a hard deal. But one thing, when you said that, the one thing that struck me, and it was amazing at Guinea Fest, there were a couple of the old school guys there, but there was that whole row where I met you, both of those tables. One of them was cork and bottle as a distributor.
New
And I
distributor.
think that guy, should have his head examined. Armin, wonderful conversation. And I'm just saying this tongue in cheek as a joke. But I mean, to start a distributor in Los Angeles at this time on wines that no one's ever heard of has to be a labor of love and passion. Okay, but here's the point I want to make. When I sat here on Tuesdays, every Tuesday morning, and I looked at the list of who was coming in, they made an appointment, I already knew the level of quality that was coming in that day. And I knew, and I won't mention any names, the stuff that was going to be mostly crap. I'm going to say 90% of the stuff that I tasted with certain vendors was crap. Other vendors are very good at curating and making sure the ones, so most of them were good, at least solid. I thought that whole table, there's like 20 wines, maybe more, had a solid base, solid level of quality. And I told his wife, I said, I just told her the same story. Did you feel that? Did you sense this? I had never heard of any of those wines. And I thought the whole lineup was really good.
Yes, the wines are good. I mean, we used to be a wine drinking
Yes. Well,
nation.
of course, 6,100
Yes.
years ago.
But we forgot about that because of the 70 years of Soviet ruling
Yes.
that artificially made us drink vodka,
Yes.
sweet wine who nobody drank, and then brandy, that wasn't really that good.
No.
So, and now whatever...
But don't tell Winston Churchill that, because he loved Noyak, but whatever. Go ahead.
Is it true though? I don't know.
I've read articles.
Yes, I hope
I've read
it's
other
true.
journalists wrote about it.
I hope it's true. But still, I want us to return to the wine traditions, wine drinking traditions. And that's what all these winemakers are doing in Armenia. And the wines are really good. Of course, there are bad wines. They're everywhere, not only in Armenia. In France, too.
Of course.
I mean,
No,
you
it takes a long
can
time.
occasionally get a bottle of horrible wine. And just because it's made in France, it doesn't mean that it's good.
No.
Or in Italy or anywhere else. But these people are really trying. And making wine in a politically and regional instability is a very hard thing. And you really have to have a passion for that. It's not about money. I mean, almost all the producers that I know, we're not talking about the big producers who are just investing and they're making money. It's a different story.
Yeah.
But the other like boutique wineries who are making wine in Armenia, it's not about profit. It's about just doing what they love.
Passion.
It's
I
passion.
mean, if you don't have it, forget it.
Yeah,
right?
and continuing the tradition. You mentioned that table, but next to that distributor was Malahi Wine.
Yes.
Maran Winery. This winery, the story of this winery goes back to 200 to 300 years.
Yeah.
They were the first one who had a wine press in the region, like 300 years ago. And now the heirs are continuing the tradition and making wine. And that was the first winery in post-Soviet era who introduced the terroir-based wine making to the Armenian to the Armenian winemaking industry. And they still continue making great wines.
I had their Voska hot the other night. There's a blend, I think, Alagote or something.
That's great.
I thought it was absolutely world class.
Yeah, it is.
And not only world class, because this is an important part of the wine industry. Wine is consumer driven. And so as much as romantic as I would want it to be, and I'm already looking forward to the Bordeaux I'm going to drink tonight, that the consumers still drive the marketplace. And I thought that was a contemporary style wine with all the fruit, but still good structure, still good acid. In the nose, I mean, it just jumped out of the glass.
Oh, yeah,
It
I
was
agree.
Fabulous wine.
True.
You know, you said something interesting. I had a winemaker sitting where you're sitting the other day, a French winemaker, and we were discussing the same problem. Like, yeah, you can go to the market in France and get a €2 wine in the supermarket, and it's going to be awful. And I brought this up the other night at the Armenian Assembly event, and I almost it was the Maran wineries and the Yakubian Hobbs winery. You got to choose at some point what side of the line you're going to be on. Are you going to try and be that supermarket $15 wine because that's a whole different type of marketing and structure, or are you going to be on the other side where you're trying to attract the boutique drinkers, the people that are interested in the terroir and they want to understand wine? And that's where we have to be. I mean, the Karas wines, because they have the backing, Irnakian's money, all the things that go behind that, they can go compete in Total Wine and Bevmo and all that.
True.
On a $15 bottle of wine. And they're not bad. You know, they're solid wines. But you brought something up I want to push a little further. I've decided that it's not even me. If you were to pick, let's say, 5 elements of a culture, just say the Armenian culture, the American culture, the French culture, the Spanish culture, the Italian culture, you would have to say that cuisine is a representative.
True.
Land, if you have it, right?
Yes.
Wine.
Yeah.
Wine should be that expression of a culture.
I would definitely put it there.
Yeah.
Yes.
If your culture. Now, the other cultures like Colombia, they don't have wine, but they have distilled spirits that represent, Chileans have pisco sours, and there's this licorice thing from other parts of the world. But wine, and Juliana Ernakian said it the best. What other product can you take halfway across the world, put on the desk, and say, this is who we are and this is when we were, if it's a proper, honest wine that represents where it's from?
I agree.
And you think that that's where we need to be?
Oh, yes, definitely. Definitely. And I think that people like me, we have a job here to do. We have to tell the stories of these wineries. We have to make the statement along with the wineries. Because, I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I was sitting down and trying wine with the representative of Chateau Angelus. So, I mean, it's that. You cannot be better than that. It's there. It's like 8 generation old winery. And there is so much to tell about them, but there isn't really.
Yeah, right.
But about us, about Armenian wineries, we have to put the word out there. And we need to tell everyone about this wine region who is constantly under the danger of being attacked or being, eliminated from that place, like it happened with Artsakh wines. All the wine region, the entire wine region just disappeared because of the war, because of the poor calculation and politics and everything else that I just really don't want to go into.
It's funny because you said Angelus and we were just there. And on the way back from France, there was a show on the TV station on the airplane, on the channels, and it was about Bordeaux, and Angelou's was highlighted in that it was that the current owner,
Yes.
And she was trying to dig into this thing, and it was sort of politically driven, and their position in the world of wine kind of is politically placed there. And my dad used to say in that picture that you're looking at, 1975. He used to say back then, the French had this amazing way of romanticizing what they are. And the more you think about that, the more it's really story driven, that history, and that I want to drink that Bordeaux because I want to feel like I'm back there like I was. And so that leads to the experience of wine being such an emotional part. Wine is an emotional purchase.
It is.
Right?
It is in so many ways, starting with the label. There are wines that I would never drink because of the label. I know it's not right, but Anush knows this.
I suppose that's accurate. I mean, you look at the label, I'm not buying it.
Yeah, and there are wines that honestly I cannot even drink. I don't know what's happening with me, but when I look at the label, I was like, no, it cannot be right.
I'll tell you a funny story. There's two stories that come from that. One of them is about Barefoot Cellars, the famous biggest brand in America. And the guy that started that was named Mike Houlihan. He was in my office in 1989. And I thought it was the dumbest idea you could ever think of, to put a foot on the label and call it Barefoot. And he would say, I'm Chateau Lafite, Lafeet of America. And I called my father. I said, Dad, you won't believe the guy came in, how stupid this is. Becomes the biggest brand in America.
Yeah.
And you want to know why that foot's on there? And you talk about the label. He was told by one of the biggest chains of wine sales back then, called Thrifty Drugs. The guy told him, I want to see that label from 40 paces away. So when you're walking down the aisle, I want to be able to see your label. I want it to stick out. And that's what he came up with.
He was right.
Yes, he was right. So, but the other story was, I bought a wine here just before we sold the company, maybe about a few months before. And it was really good. And I didn't pay attention to anything on the label. It was a hand sketch. It was like this drawing, and it was a man. I didn't really pay attention. I just poured it, tasted it, made my notes, called him back and said, I'll make a deal with you. Well, then when I hand it off to my staff to write about it, to at least get the information, she goes, are you sure you want to feature this wine? I'm like, why? And she shows me the website. It was this whole S&M male-driven thing, guys with jock straps. I mean, it was gross for me. And the label was the same. I didn't notice it. It was a hand drawing of this guy with a hat and like chains on his arms and stuff. I go, I'm in big trouble if I put this on the street. And I call the guy, I go, oh, sorry, man, I got to cancel the PO. I've never canceled POs, maybe 2 in my career. And I had to do this really discuss. That's how important it is. But, going back to the main point, which is the experiential part of wine. And so now, even for me, if I open a bottle of Duzdabanyan, I was there. And I have this image of being there. Yeah. How do we do that in Los Angeles with these wines from Armenia? The Guinea Fest, maybe this is to your point, it was all Armenians.
Yes, but it wasn't like that before. So this year it was different. They had a lot of non-Armenian guests and consumers before too. And Armenian wines are getting into big markets.
Yeah.
For example, Karas is in Costco.
That's right.
Armas is in Total Wine and More, starting this year. A couple of months ago, they
Victoria. Nobody works harder than Victoria.
Yeah, Victoria. And other wines too. I mean, I think we just have to continue what we're all doing and just introduce the wines. And articles are important because people are still, thank God, reading. Yes. Most of them, at least.
Well, certainly in the wine trade.
Yeah, so we'll see. And we have to, the wine community, obviously, has to be more active, do more wine tastings, just to introduce wine to larger audiences.
So how often are you pitching wine articles to the periodicals, Spectator, Enthusiast, and there's a whole bunch of smaller ones?
Yeah, not as...
much as you want.
Yeah, not as much as I want. because I'm busy with. Well, this is a passion for me too.
Yeah,
so this
right.
is not where I make my
Daily,
living.
right.
Yes, but I have another job. I have a day job, so which is a PR, doing PR for
PR.
a non-profit organization
Oh, wow. Okay.
here in Glendale. So yes, but when there is a very interesting story, and I love to dig deep and write about the history, especially the historical aspect of the winery and the wine that I'm writing about. If there is a story, for example, right now I have 4 stories in making. They're gonna be out sometimes in, I don't know, in November, in December. They told me.
And how long from your inception to that first letter of an article to when you think it's done does it take you?
The newspaper.
Yeah, any article. Let's say you're going to write an article about the amber wines in Armenia. When you thought of it and you sat down to your computer the first time,
Yes.
and then however long it took you to write it till you thought you were done, and then rewrite it, and then read it again and go, wow, I missed that point. And how long does that usually take you?
Oh, it's a constant process.
Yeah,
it's a process. It depends. They give me a period of time to write. For example, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. It depends on the
They give you a
story.
deadline.
Yes, and then I send it back to them. They send me the edits or the questions that they want to learn more about, and I send them the edits or I contact wine producers and then I talk to them. And it's a process, but it's a good process. I love that.
There's a lot of Armenians in the domestic wine business. Have you ever written about them before?
Domestic wine.
Yeah, like the Bezjans. There's Kiami Cellars in Paso. There's
like here in yes. So I didn't write about them yet, but I pitched the article for to different magazines, and I just don't want to say it now, but I am planning to write about it next year. We'll see. Fingers crossed. One
guy just passed away, Sam Balakian. He makes a lot of wine in Paso. His wife still does. I forgot all that. Her name starts with a V. But it's interesting because I don't, as my travels throughout the wine world, all of a sudden you show up. There's one woman in Napa, Sharon Kazan Harris, and she has the audacity to pour Bordeaux in a downtown Napa tasting room. And her wines are gorgeous. She's the winemaker. They make them at one of the co-ops, but she's very talented. And I found her on LinkedIn.
Interesting.
And we became very good friends. And so whenever we're in Napa, her house is right on Highway 29. It's it's a really cool facility to taste wine in. But she and I are going to get together next time we're up, and I'm bringing a host of Armenian wines and Vahez Iranian wine. She wants to taste that because she went to the movie when it was in Napa. Yeah, right. I always forget the name. What's it called?
Molana.
Yeah, Molana. So, so this is why you want to pursue this. You want to continue exposing. Now, do you ever think you'll get into writing about French wines or?
No. I mean, there are no limits. I can write about any wine.
Yeah.
It just when I write about Armenian wine, it's like going home.
Yes.
It's very easy for me because I know everything. I know what I'm writing about. There are no secrets.
How often do you go back to Armenia?
Oh, the last time I was there was this summer. I took my kids because they're old enough now to see and understand their culture, their homeland.
Yeah.
They were there before 2 times, but now that it was
and
a different.
What do you think of the changes in downtown and in the rest of the country?
Well, there were good changes and obviously bad changes. So good changes were in like casual living of people, but unfortunately, regional changes are present and we're losing a lot. And I don't know, it's just sad.
I mean, society there, when we were there in 2007, was the first time I ever went. My mother-in-law owned a hotel there. The Ani Hotel was hers. And, they were, the corruption was still there, and it was very thick then, probably even more. But at that time, you could only get kebab and, tomatoes, and you didn't really drink the water. And now it's like Paris downtown, except for the architecture, but the food and the safetiness of it, and the way able to walk around is pretty amazing. But the part that disturbs me a little bit is that you go 100 meters outside of town and you're back to a pretty rural, rustic part of town, and most people that work in Armenia can't afford to even be in Yerevan, right?
That's the saddest part, and it was always like that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But now I think now it's more for us going back from the United States. It was accessible, but when I asked my friends, and when I took them to, when I met with them at the restaurants that I thought were okay, were just regular restaurants, turned out they couldn't even afford that restaurant.
Right.
And it's not fair. I mean, it's not right.
No, it's well, I think that's, byproduct of socialism, and it'll take many generations to flatten that out. And where is all the money coming from? This is not a political show, though. It looks like it's turning into one.
No,
but
let's not do that.
So my interest in it, and I was sort of agnostic to all of it until Garan Bagdasarian from Abris was sitting where you're sitting. And I forgot how I even got a hold of him. And then when we were in New York for an event in Soho, my wife remembered that the Kapralians had a jewelry business in Soho. So I got a hold of the daughter, and she sat down with us too.
Alexander.
Yeah. And we all of a sudden had this whole idea of, and it goes further. It's really interesting to me. And maybe it's part of an article for you. My question in my mind was, why are wineries the spoils of war? And clearly the Azerbaijanis wanted the wineries. And when you listen to Garan, the end of the teaser reel I did, he's like, they took everything. They took the bottles, the corks, and everything. And we were afraid to leave. We were afraid to take stuff in our trucks because we would be targeted having this stuff in the car. So we left everything.
Yes.
And they got taken. And so it led me into World War II, which was the first war where the invading armies realized that there's something really cool here and we shouldn't destroy it. We should probably just embrace it. Yeah. And the Nazis had an amazing channel and for Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne, and Alsace. But before that, it wasn't like that. World War I, they destroyed everything. So I just thought, wow, now it's come to roost in our own backyard. And it was very sad stuff to listen to. And it opened the doors for me into a huge subject of things. Have you written about that? Or is it too painful to do?
No, I wrote an article about all these wineries who were left in Artsakh, about Karen's Abris, about Hraj and Alexandra's Takri, and Aran, and what was the fourth one? I
don't remember. There's four though, right?
Yeah, there was a fourth one that I wrote about for Men's Journal. And unfortunately, no other publication wanted that article. And I pitched for over a year.
Really?
To different publications. They just...
What was the general reason that they would...
They didn't give me a reason.
Just no interest.
They weren't interested. And Wine Enthusiast wrote an article. They asked someone else to write, non-Armenian. I don't even remember his name. He wrote an article about supposedly Artsakh wines, but it was mostly about the Armenian wines being affected by this situation. So I decided to write about... Kataro. Kataro was the fourth wine.
Oh yeah, Kataro.
Yeah, yes. So I decided to write about these people because, especially people from the United States who basically moved there, made investments, $1 million investments, not only growing grapes and making wines, but also building factories, building hotels, restaurants, and so many other things. And then they just were left with nothing. So I wrote that article for Men's Journal, and then Jason Weiss from Some TV, he invited me to his podcast, and we talked about the article and on this whole situation.
Oh, great.
About Artsakh. So we were just trying to...
When was that? Recently?
Yes, very recently.
Oh, yeah.
Like a month ago.
Is he in LA?
Jason?
Jason?
Yes.
Yeah. He's a talented guy, and he tells some good stories.
He is. I met him because of the Vahes Molana.
Yeah,
so
right,
Molana,
yeah.
They were screening Molana here in Glendale in Lamel Theater, and
that's right.
Yes, so I went there, and then LA Times asked me to write about the movie.
No, that's great. So that was your article. I think I read that.
Probably.
Yeah.
If it was in LA Times, it was my article.
Well, I don't subscribe to it anymore, but I think I got a hold of that.
Yeah. So yes, that was another thing. And I had a friend who was always very skeptical about me talking about wine, just winemaking, all these traditions and everything. And she was like, come on, wine is also, it's the same thing as vodka, as, I don't know, tequila or any other beverage. I was like, no, you don't understand. It's different. I invited her to come with me to see the movie. She came. In the end of the movie, she was all tears and she was like, Ani, now I understand what you meant.
Well, sometimes you just got to show them. You
Yes,
just got to take
exactly.
them to the
Words
trough
are
and
not
make
enough.
them drink.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I had this funny story, and I was with Vahe at when we were there last. He came in this building actually years ago, and he walked in, and we both recognized each other. The first podcast we did together. And he goes, "You don't remember me, do you?" I said, "Well, you look familiar." He goes, "I bought wine from you."
Oh.
So when he was in Berkeley with his restaurant, this is before the Armenian stuff, but either before or after the Italian. I think he did the Italian wineries, then came to Berkeley, then went to Armenia. He needed Gallo Chardonnay for, he says, I think it was my niece's wedding, and it was in L.A., and he didn't know anybody in L.A. to buy it from.
Oh.
And we had done business together. But when he left that day, I came home and told my wife, and this is probably 5 or 7 years ago, I said, I just met probably one of the most brilliant winemakers I've met, period. Forget Armenia. For a complete understanding of what this industry is about. Because he's a balance between, and I think this is where almost all winemakers need to be. The ones with more capital don't have to be, but a balance between consumerism and selling stuff and manufacturing things, that the passion side of manufacturing things that represent something. And it's a very difficult teeter. It's a very difficult balancing act.
It is.
And to make money is almost impossible.
Yeah. And it's like art. When you make art, you cannot sell it. It's kind of hard to sell it, right? Because you're the artist there. I think it's the same with wine. They have to have a strong marketing arm to just market and sell whatever they're making. The winemaker, the artist is making.
And most are farmers. I mean, think about it, winemakers are really farmers.
True.
The guy sitting there the other day, a French winemaker, he said, and I'd never heard it put this way, it was very eloquent. It was, great wines are born in the vineyard. They don't grow into in the bottle. In other words, unless you're pulling out of that vineyard the right stuff and do it right, you're not going to develop a great wine sitting in the cellar.
Yes, true.
Right?
Yes.
That's what happens.
I think it's the entire process.
They're farmers.
The winemaker, Trinity Canyon Vineyards in Armenia, he was telling me, when I was interviewing him for the Orange Wine article, he was telling me that they're singing songs, Armenian traditional songs, to their wines that were aging in garages in the amphoras.
Well, that's not an unusual thing. There's a winery in Sardinia or one of the islands there, and they did an experiment where they took 2 grapevines, they put them in rooms, they planted and watered them, and one of them they played rock and roll, and the other one they played classical music. And according to this study, it was Bose, the famous audio company. The grapes vine with the classical music grew closer to the speaker, and the rock and roll one grew away from the speaker. And so this winery in, I think it's Sardinia, has giant speakers in the vineyard that they play this music through. Do you think that the risk to embark in an appellation like Armenia, an entire country as an appellation, let's call it, is greater than most places in the world to try and start something like this?
Yes, I think so.
Because
of the regional developments.
Yes.
Because there is a constant something happening.
Like something in the back here.
Yes.
There's always some backstory going on.
There is. And the region of Vajottor, that is the main region when they grow grapes and make wine, is very close to where this is all happening. I don't want to go into politics.
I understand that, but that's an added risk to all the other headwinds of wine.
Yes.
And we're halfway across the world where, even Georgian wines that have been around forever and they've been in America for a long time, they don't have a great foothold. They don't have a stronghold here. I've tasted very few. I've tasted almost zero Croatian wines, which are gorgeous, while here in America. And so this is a long haul that we're into.
It is, but Georgia, for example, they're doing a great job in marketing their wines because the government is involved.
That's right.
They have the government support. Unfortunately, Armenian wines don't.
Why?
I don't know.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
No one's ever told you the answer to that, or no one's ever asked the question?
I don't know. But for me, it has to be one of the priorities for the government because it's something that represents the country. One of the things that represents the country.
It's only a $50 million industry. I mean, that's some wineries one winery in California is much. Opus is larger than that.
Yeah.
And there's only 17,000 hectares, about 40,000 acres. And Oregon has more than that. California has 11 times that. Yeah. But it's an interesting problem. And I had a gentleman in, Mr. Booker, and he's part of the Washington State Commission, which is a government commission on wine. And what the commission does, and I want your opinion of applying this methodology to Armenia. The government commission taxes the farmers. 2 tons, whatever the price is per ton. You pick 10 tons, you're going to pay this tax. They take that tax, they put it in a pool of money, and then there's a consortium of vintners, all Washington vintners, that get together and decide what to do with the money, how to market the region, how to get people, other parts of the country to learn about what they do.
That's
do you think
genius.
there's any chance that an Armenian wine group would allow themselves to be taxed?
It's a hard question.
That's a tough question, right?
It is. There is a foundation. There is a Armenian Vine and Wine Foundation. That is, I think it's a government organization.
Yeah, it is.
Who does oversee some parts of the operation. I know they're doing stuff. But I don't see that big support that the other countries like Georgia has. And then also all these wines that are left in Artsakh and now are considered Azerbaijani wines. I am constantly seeing advertisements on my social media talking about Azerbaijani wines. Those are not.
Really?
Yes.
Never
So
heard of it.
they started already. They're doing things with it. They're marketing it as their own. Obviously, it's not theirs.
No, right, yeah.
Yeah, it's all the wineries that we left there. But so this is again.
I didn't know that. That's really sad.
Yeah, and also we have Turkish wine going on too, and they're pretty big. And only once I read in an article where a winemaker is admitting that before the genocide, well, obviously he's not saying the word, but he's saying that before there were Armenians and Greeks who were growing grapes and making wine there. I was like, okay, at least thank you for being honest.
Some recognition there.
Some recognition, yes.
I'd never known about, certainly everybody knows about the Persian wines and Chateau Moussard and stuff like that.
Yeah, but
we went to an Armenian restaurant in San Francisco. That was only a short-lived restaurant, but they had a credible list. And I didn't recognize anything. And there were a lot of Turkish wines on that list. This is probably 10 years ago. Yeah. The restaurant's gone now. I had a question and I forgot what it was. This happens quite frequently in my my tenure here. The wine process, one of the things too that's important in the wine world is when Vahe was telling me about the price in drums of grapes, and I was having a panic attack because it was not even a tenth of what grapes cost in America. And so you kind of think that those wines should be inexpensive. If it costs, the grapes are so little, price wise, but all the other costs to get them to America,
it's huge.
Now, it becomes a big number.
Yes.
And so to get an Armenian wine that's $30 or $40 retail, and this is the general problem in wine, even the wines in that painting. If I already know that I can buy a Duckhorn Merlot for $60 or $40, why am I going to risk buying an Armenian wine in that price range?
And if you don't have any idea about that
no one
wine,
tells
right?
you about it.
Yeah, you have to try and see what it is.
Right.
And you cannot really go and buy a wine that is even more, like 60 or 80 bucks, and just try it.
Right.
Not this consumer, not this age.
Not right now.
Not right
I will
now.
say there's two things that have happened that I thought were very encouraging. One is, particularly here in Los Angeles, where the wholesale brands and consolidation of the wholesalers has been very difficult on most brands. And, in order to get a wine, for instance, if Voskavaz was here and they wanted to be in the Southern Wines and Spirits book, it'd be almost impossible. And even if they were in it, they wouldn't sell any, because it's up to the supplier or the winery to go out and shop these things. They're basically just become trucking companies for these brands. But there are 2 or 3 smaller distributors in Los Angeles that are not Armenian. They're not Middle Eastern distributors that carry Armenian brands.
Okay.
And that's very encouraging.
Yes.
Because that means they've made them past the tasting panels of these companies. Massenois is one of them. Garber is another one. That these are independent small distributors out there shaking the tree that have French, Italians, biodynamic, all the things in their book. And that's a very encouraging thing to happen.
Sure. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to someone from Wyoming, and she was telling me that she was representing a chef who couldn't be at the meeting because of some things that happened. So she was telling me that they have a wine store there next to their restaurants, and she was asking me what is the good Armenian wine to have, because they have all these wines from different parts of the world that are not very common in the market. So that was
That's in Wyoming.
In Wyoming, yeah.
I wonder if it's because everybody's leaving California and going to Wyoming, so they have to have better wines.
I don't know, but it's going to be cool, pretty cool.
Actually, I think Viken Yakubian brought that up the other night, that the Yakubian Hobbs is in Wyoming somewhere.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool, but that would be because of Hobbs' part,
Yes,
I think.
yes. I actually made a joke about that, which I said, this Yakubian Hobbs. And actually, that's another very important point. And we're almost out of time. Actually, we're out of time. But
we are.
that... Paul Hobbs is one of the famed enologists in the world. And typically, a guy like him, he goes out and helps for a fee and gets you on your feet. But in this case, he put his name on the bottle. And that was a very encouraging and very important thing. I mean, I said something like, but he's dealing with Armenians, so he's the second name. It's not Hobbs and Yakubian. It's
Yakubian and Hobbs. No, it's very cool.
But the other enologist, probably better known, is Michel Rolland, and he was in there with the Irnakians.
Yes.
And this is an important part of the Armenian wine culture as well. Michel Rolland tells Juliana, you can grow grapes here, it's the right conditions, but we won't know for 100 years. And this will be our final thought. The reason that is because it takes 100 years of all the different emaciations of terroir and picking conditions and all the things that go on in the world of wine and the soil nutrients to understand what's going to be developed from those vineyards. And that's where the world has a head start on us. The Russians, the USSR stagnated all of that. There was no technology. There was no vineyard management. Nobody cared. And my point the other night was, wow, we did really well in the short amount of time we've done to describe what can happen and produce wines. And Miriam Sagatalian, when in a conversation, who she is, said an interesting thing. And I think the other night, the wine sort of focused on this subject, and that is, we really don't know what Arani is. We haven't grown it enough in enough different conditions and played with it enough, because you only get one chance a year to figure it out, to understand what this grape is, until the Milani Ani stainless steel Arani I had the other night. And it reeked of something other than all the other grapes I've ever tasted. So we have, which is great, old vines, important, deep roots, very expressive of where they're grown. We get the full nutrients of deeper roots, but, vinification techniques, all the things that go behind producing that bottle of wine that represents what it's supposed to represent. So the opposite case, and this is why this sort of where we're at with the Armenian wines. There's a guy in Missouri who's been trying to propagate what American varietals there were. There were no Vitis vinifera varietals, but there were Vinous Lambrusco varietals. And I told him, I said, this is almost an impossible task for you because you're dealing with grapes that no one's ever heard of, that they haven't been grown for 100 years. They're just, you've got remnants of them, and you're putting them in an area that no one's ever grown grapes in before. And so there's so many variables. You may never figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So here you've got 100-year-old vines. So at least we know that the vine is producing grapes that's going to be
good for wine.
Yes, good for what it is and expressive for where it is. And now we have to learn the vinification techniques, which could take 20 vintages.
Yes.
And that's not cheap.
It's not. It's especially for a country like Armenia that has no not many ways to get connected with the world because of its regional
That's
situation.
Right.
Yeah.
They say it takes 8 hours just, at least from Artsakh, it took 8 hours just to get to the port.
True. Yeah.
I mean, that's a long bus ride. You never afford that in California.
Yes.
You would just add too much to the price. Thank you for stopping me at Guinea Fest and saying hi. And I got a chance to chat with you about all these things. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about in the next coming months, and we'll talk again.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers.